What happens when the most controversial royal meets Britain's most unforgiving talk show host? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Kevin O'Sullivan for what was supposed to be a straightforward discussion about his latest ventures, only to find himself facing the most brutal interrogation of his media career. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of Kevin O'Sullivan's show started like any other celebrity appearance, but within minutes, tensions were running so high that security was called to the studio. The Duke of Sussex, who had agreed to appear on the show to promote his upcoming documentary series, found himself completely unprepared for O'Sullivan's trademark confrontational style. What began as seemingly innocent questions about his new projects quickly descended into a verbal battleground that had viewers glued to their screens and the studio audience gasping in shock. The atmosphere in the studio was electric from the moment Prince Harry walked onto the set. O'Sullivan, known for his razor-sharp wit and willingness to ask the questions other hosts won't dare touch, had clearly done his homework. Sources close to the production revealed that the host had been preparing for weeks, compiling a list of the most controversial moments from Harry's recent interviews and public appearances. The stage was set for what would become one of the most explosive celebrity confrontations in recent television history. As the cameras rolled, O'Sullivan's opening remarks seemed cordial enough, welcoming the prince with his characteristic Irish charm. But seasoned viewers of the show knew better than to be fooled by the host's initial pleasantries. The veteran broadcaster has built his reputation on luring guests into a false sense of security before delivering his most devastating questions. Harry, perhaps overconfident from his recent string of sympathetic interviews with more mainstream media outlets, appeared relaxed and ready to discuss his various projects. "Your Royal Highness, welcome to the show," O'Sullivan began, his tone deceptively warm. "I have to say, it's quite refreshing to have someone of your stature willing to sit down for a proper conversation. So many celebrities these days seem to avoid anything that might challenge their carefully crafted narratives." Harry shifted slightly in his chair, perhaps sensing the underlying tension in the host's words. "Well, Kevin, I've always believed in honest dialogue. That's what my wife and I have been trying to promote through our various platforms." O'Sullivan's smile grew wider, and those familiar with his interviewing style knew this was when things were about to get interesting. "Honest dialogue, you say? That's fascinating, because I've been reviewing some of your recent statements, and I have to admit, I'm having trouble reconciling some of your claims with the actual facts." The prince's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, but O'Sullivan was already moving in for the kill. "For instance, you've repeatedly talked about your desire for privacy, yet you've given more interviews in the past 3 years than most A-list celebrities manage in a decade. You've written a best-selling memoir detailing the most intimate aspects of your family life, and now you're here promoting yet another documentary series. How exactly does that square with your stated desire to live a quiet, private life?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Harry's response was immediate and defensive. "I think there's a difference between wanting privacy and wanting to control your own narrative. We've been subjected to years of lies and misrepresentations in the British press, and the only way to counter that is to tell our own story." O'Sullivan leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. "But Harry, and I hope you don't mind me calling you Harry rather than Your Royal Highness, given your apparent desire to distance yourself from royal protocol, isn't it a bit rich to complain about media intrusion when you've essentially turned your family's private business into a multi-million-dollar entertainment empire?" The studio audience was beginning to sense the shift in tone, and a nervous energy filled the room. Harry's jaw tightened, and his carefully practiced media smile began to falter. "I think that's a rather unfair characterization of what we're trying to do. We're using our platform to highlight important issues and to give a voice to those who might not otherwise be heard." "Important issues," O'Sullivan repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Like your grandmother's alleged racism? Like your father's parenting skills? Like your brother's marriage problems? These are the important issues you're championing?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees as Harry's face flushed with anger. Those aren't the only issues we've discussed, and I think you're deliberately mischaracterizing our work to create controversy. O'Sullivan's laugh was sharp and humorless. Create controversy? Harry, you've created enough controversy to fuel a dozen talk shows. The question is whether you're willing to take responsibility for the consequences of your actions, or if you're going to continue playing the victim card every time someone asks you a difficult question. The prince's hands gripped the arms of his chair, and his voice took on a harder edge. I don't think asking for basic human decency and respect constitutes playing the victim card. My family and I have been subjected to a level of harassment and abuse that would be considered unacceptable if directed at anyone else. Harassment and abuse. O'Sullivan's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. You mean like the harassment and abuse your own family has endured because of your public statements? Your grandfather, may he rest in peace, spent his final years dealing with the fallout from your accusations. Your grandmother, who dedicated her entire life to public service, was branded a racist on international television based on your second-hand account of a conversation you weren't even present for. Harry was now visibly struggling to maintain his composure, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. That's not fair, and you know it. We never named anyone specifically, and we've always made it clear that our issues aren't with the Queen or Prince Philip personally. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, O'Sullivan countered, his voice rising with conviction. When you go on the world's most watched chat show and make vague accusations about racist comments from unnamed family members, you're effectively throwing everyone under the bus. The court of public opinion doesn't deal in nuance, Harry. You know that better than anyone. The tension in the studio was now palpable, with audience members leaning forward in their seats and production staff exchanging worried glances. What had started as a challenging but professional interview was rapidly transforming into something far more confrontational and personal. But this was only the beginning of what would become one of the most explosive television moments of the year, as O'Sullivan prepared to deliver his most devastating blow yet. The veteran broadcaster's eyes narrowed as he leaned back in his chair, creating a moment of calculated silence that had the entire studio holding its breath. Harry, perhaps sensing that something even more damaging was coming, tried to regain control of the narrative. Kevin, I think we're getting away from the real issues here. The work that Megan and I are doing through our foundation is about creating positive change in the world. O'Sullivan's smile was predatory now, devoid of any warmth. Megan, he repeated slowly, savoring the name like a fine wine. Yes, let's talk about Megan. Because I have to say, Harry, your wife's behavior since joining the royal family has been quite remarkable. In fact, I'd go so far as to say she's managed to achieve something that even the most skilled political operatives would struggle with. What exactly are you implying? Harry's voice was sharp, his protective instincts clearly triggered by the mention of his wife. I'm not implying anything, Harry. I'm stating facts. Your wife managed to spend less than 2 years as a working member of the royal family, yet she's somehow positioned herself as the victim of an institution that has existed for over 1,000 years. That takes a special kind of talent, doesn't it? The prince's face was now flushed with anger, his carefully maintained composure cracking visibly. You have no idea what my wife went through. The level of scrutiny, the racism she faced, the complete lack of support from the institution. The racism she faced? O'Sullivan interrupted, his voice dripping with skepticism. You mean the same racism that somehow didn't prevent her from being welcomed into the royal family with open arms? The same racism that didn't stop your grandmother from walking her down the aisle at your wedding? The same racism that didn't prevent her from being given a platform to speak about issues she cared about? Harry was now gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. You're twisting everything. The racism wasn't from the Queen or Prince Philip. It was from within the institution, from people who couldn't accept that a biracial American woman was joining the family. O'Sullivan pounced on this like a cat on a mouse. Ah, so now we're getting somewhere. You're making specific accusations about specific people. So, tell me, Harry, who exactly are these racist members of the royal family? Because your continued refusal to name names while making these explosive allegations is having a devastating effect on people who can't defend themselves. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Harry's breathing had become visibly labored, and his voice took on a defensive, almost pleading quality. We've never wanted to hurt anyone. We've always said that our issues are with the system, not with individuals. But that's not true, is it? O'Sullivan's voice was relentless now, like a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. You've made it very personal. You've written extensively about your father's failings as a parent. You've criticized your brother's relationship with his wife. You've even questioned your stepmother's motives for marrying your father. These aren't systemic issues, Harry. These are personal attacks on your own family members. Harry's facade was crumbling rapidly, and his voice rose in pitch as he struggled to maintain his position. Everything I've written about my family has been about trying to heal relationships, not damage them. Sometimes you have to address difficult truths in order to move forward. O'Sullivan's laugh was harsh and mocking. Heal relationships? Harry, you've done more damage to your family relationships in the past 3 years than most people manage in a lifetime. Your father barely speaks to you. Your brother won't take your calls. Your grandmother died without seeing her great-grandchildren. How exactly is that healing? The mention of his grandmother's death hit Harry like a physical blow, and for a moment, he looked genuinely vulnerable. But O'Sullivan wasn't finished. And let's talk about those great-grandchildren, shall we? Because I find it fascinating that you're so concerned about your children's privacy and safety that you've moved them to another continent, yet you're perfectly happy to use them as props in your media appearances when it suits your narrative. That's completely out of line, Harry snarled, his voice now openly hostile. My children are off limits. They had nothing to do with our decision to step back from royal duties. Oh, but they had everything to do with it, didn't they? O'Sullivan pressed on, completely ignoring Harry's warning. Because, according to your own statements, concerns about your children's safety and security were major factors in your decision to leave. Yet, here you are, constantly drawing attention to yourselves through media appearances, documentaries, and tell-all interviews. You can't have it both ways, Harry. The prince was now visibly trembling with rage, his voice shaking as he fought to maintain control. You don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea what it's like to live under that level of scrutiny, to have your every move analyzed and criticized. O'Sullivan's response was swift and brutal. Actually, Harry, I think I have a pretty good idea. Because I've been watching you manufacture outrage and controversy for the past 3 years, and I have to say, you've become quite skilled at it. The question is whether you actually believe your own propaganda, or if you're just that desperate for attention. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Harry's response was immediate and explosive. How dare you? How dare you sit there and question my motives when you don't know the first thing about what my family has been through? Your family? O'Sullivan's voice rose to match Harry's intensity. Which family are you referring to, Harry? The one you've spent the last 3 years publicly destroying, or the one you've created in California with your wife and children? Because it seems to me that you're perfectly happy to sacrifice one for the other. The studio was now in complete chaos, with audience members gasping and production staff looking increasingly nervous. Harry was on his feet now, his face contorted with rage. I've had enough of this. You invited me here under false pretenses, and now you're attacking my wife and children. This is exactly the kind of behavior that drove us away from the UK in the first place. But O'Sullivan wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed to be feeding off the chaos, his voice growing stronger and more confident as Harry lost control. False pretenses? Harry, I invited you here to have an honest conversation about your actions and their consequences. The fact that you can't handle basic questions about your behavior says more about you than it does about me. The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch, with both men standing and facing each other across the studio set. The carefully choreographed world of television interviews had completely broken down, replaced by raw, unfiltered emotion and anger. And yet, even this explosive moment was just the prelude to what was about to unfold. As O'Sullivan prepared to deliver the final blow that would send the prince storming out of the studio in a rage that would be talked about for years to come, O'Sullivan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, cold and calculating despite the heated atmosphere. You know what, Harry? I think we've danced around the real issue long enough. Let's talk about what this is really about. Let's talk about money. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Harry's face went from red with anger to pale with shock. Money? What are you talking about? Oh, come on, Harry. Don't insult my intelligence or that of our viewers. This entire victim narrative you and your wife have constructed, it's not about justice or healing or any of the noble causes you claim to champion. It's about cold, hard cash. O'Sullivan's voice was steady now, methodical, like a surgeon making precise incisions. Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's completely ridiculous. Everything we've done has been about telling our truth and… Your truth? O'Sullivan's laugh was bitter and mocking. Your truth that just happened to be worth tens of millions of dollars to Netflix? Your truth that secured you a multi-million-dollar book deal? Your truth that's landed you lucrative speaking engagements and media contracts? What a convenient truth that turned out to be. The prince's hands were shaking now. Whether from rage or shock, it was impossible to tell. You're twisting everything. Yes, we've had to find ways to support ourselves after being cut off financially, but that doesn't mean… Cut off financially? O'Sullivan's voice rose to a roar. Harry, you inherited millions from your mother's estate. You received money from your father for years after you stepped back from royal duties. You're sitting on a fortune that most people couldn't even dream of, and you have the audacity to play the victim because you can't access the sovereign grant anymore? The studio audience was now murmuring among themselves, the atmosphere electric with tension and disbelief. Production staff were frantically signaling to each other, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation continue. Harry's voice cracked as he responded, It's not about the money, it's about independence. It's about being able to control our own lives and tell our own stories without interference from… Without interference from the truth, you mean? O'Sullivan's interruption was brutal and precise. Because let's be honest about what you've really done here, Harry. You've monetized your family's pain. You've turned your grandmother's death, your father's struggles, your brother's private moments into content for your streaming deals and book sales. The accusation hit Harry like a physical blow. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and what looked disturbingly like guilt. How dare you? How dare you suggest that we would exploit our family's pain for financial gain? I don't have to suggest it, Harry. The evidence is right there for everyone to see. Your book came out just months after your grandmother's death. Your Netflix series aired while your father was dealing with his cancer diagnosis. Your wife's podcast launched while your family was still reeling from your public accusations. The timing isn't coincidental, is it? The mention of his father's cancer diagnosis seemed to hit Harry harder than anything else O'Sullivan had said. His voice became smaller, more defensive. My father's illness has nothing to do with our media projects. Those were planned long before. Before what? Before you realized you could maximize the impact and the profit by releasing them at the most emotionally devastating moments possible? O'Sullivan's voice was relentless now, each word delivered with surgical precision. You're not a victim, Harry. You're a predator. You've preyed on your own family's vulnerability and tragedy for your own financial benefit. The word predator seemed to snap something inside Harry. His composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally snapped completely. That's it. I'm done. I won't sit here and listen to you call me a predator for trying to protect my family and tell our story. Your story? O'Sullivan's voice followed Harry as he began to rise from his chair. Or your product? Because that's what your family's pain has become, hasn't it? A product to be packaged, marketed, and sold to the highest bidder. Harry was now standing, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. You're sick. You're absolutely sick. I came here in good faith to have a conversation about the important work we're doing, and you've turned it into a character assassination. Good faith? O'Sullivan's laugh was harsh and unforgiving. Harry, You came here to promote your latest media venture, just like every other celebrity who sits in that chair. The difference is, most of them don't try to disguise their commercial interests as some kind of noble crusade. Harry was now backing away from the interview setup, his hands raised as if to ward off further attacks. I don't have to listen to this. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has their own agenda. My agenda? O'Sullivan's voice rose to match Harry's retreat. My agenda is to ask the questions that other interviewers are too cowardly or too starstruck to ask. My agenda is to hold public figures accountable for their actions, especially when those actions hurt innocent people. Innocent people? Harry's voice cracked with emotion. You want to talk about innocent people? What about my children? What about my wife? They're the innocent people in all of this, and they're the ones who've suffered because of the media's relentless attacks. O'Sullivan's response was swift and merciless. Your children are suffering because their father has turned their family's private business into a public spectacle. Your wife is suffering because she married into a situation she was completely unprepared for and then chose to burn bridges rather than learn and adapt. Harry's face was now streaked with tears of rage and frustration. You don't know anything about our situation. You don't know what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your every decision criticized. Actually, Harry, I know exactly what it's like. O'Sullivan's voice was now quiet but deadly. The difference is, I don't expect sympathy for choosing a career in the public eye. I don't blame others for the consequences of my own decisions. And I certainly don't monetize my family's pain to pay for my lifestyle. The final accusation was too much for Harry to bear. With a strangled cry of rage, he ripped off his microphone and hurled it to the floor. I'm done. This interview is over. O'Sullivan remained seated, watching calmly as Harry stormed toward the studio exit. Running away again, Harry? That seems to be your solution to everything these days. Harry spun around one final time, his face twisted with fury. You'll be hearing from my lawyers about this character assassination. This is exactly the kind of behavior that drove us out of the UK in the first place. Your lawyers? O'Sullivan's voice followed Harry as he reached the studio door. Add them to the list of people you're paying to clean up the mess you've made of your life. With that final insult ringing in his ears, Harry slammed through the studio door and disappeared into the corridor beyond, leaving behind a stunned audience and a host who looked remarkably satisfied with the evening's work. O'Sullivan turned to face the cameras directly, his composure completely restored. Well, there you have it, folks. The real Harry Windsor, stripped of his carefully crafted public persona and revealed for what he really is, a man who has turned his family's tragedy into his personal treasure chest. The studio fell silent as the credits began to roll, but the shock and controversy of what had just unfolded would reverberate through the media landscape for weeks to come. In less than an hour, Kevin O'Sullivan had accomplished what years of royal protocol and media training had failed to do. He had exposed the raw, unfiltered truth behind one of the most controversial figures of our time. The confrontation was over, but its impact would be felt for years to come, cementing O'Sullivan's reputation as the interviewer who dared to ask the questions no one else would, and leaving Harry's carefully constructed victim narrative in tatters on the studio floor.